A wicka, wicka, wicka.
Where do we go from here?
Oh, I should have kept the beat going. Not so good at actually beatboxing.
Oh,
I
man.
just pick up riffs from Danny. We need to get him on here.
Yeah.
Have him just go off, wake everyone up in the morning.
I like
Yeah.
it. Well, I'm glad you said that because we should probably say good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Hopefully that was peppy.
Or just scary. Children crying and
Running for their lives.
I know, Mommy, make it stop.
Who are these strange men? And why are they yelling at me?
They want me to be happy.
Oh.
Yeah, it's all. I saw some meme the other day about people, clowns having to put on clown makeup because no one could tell that they were joking. I was like, maybe that's for Reed and I's show.
Yes.
By the way, that was a joke.
Yes, it's the big old smile.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's kind of a shame that clowns had gotten such a negative slant over the last 20 years. And I don't know if that's because of the horror movies or because of the kind of pedophilia type of feel to it, but like clowns are like such a good thing. Like your intention was to make people laugh and have a good time, and then now it's like, I don't know, like people, when you say clown, like you get so many other reactions, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no one likes clowns now. Clowns are just creepy. Yeah, and you kind of wonder what killed it, or you wonder if the comedy itself shifted and the clowns just didn't stay up with the times.
Yeah, that's very possible too. You know, kind of like we were talking about the other day when we were talking about the different types of comedy last week, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, moving away from that physical comedy.
Yeah.
And, you know, since we're so evolved and intellectual now, we require more to get a laugh.
Yes. It's also that we have just access to so much of it.
Yeah.
I like the idea that maybe the clowns were showing up in these small villages where people hadn't laughed in 5 years, and all they have to do is pretend to trip and fall, and everyone just loses it, right? They're like, oh, that was the funniest thing I've ever seen. You know?
And he's just like, man, are they really going for this? All right, I'm going
I'll
for this.
do some more. Yeah.
And then the next day he shows up for work. He's like, I wonder if I put a big red dot on my nose.
Oh my God, that's so funny.
Yeah, and then they just start laughing.
know.
It's like, oh man, yeah, that's an interesting point. I'd love to see the studies. Like, I'd love to take like a tightly wound town, right? And then you just insert like a bunch of like comedians or clowns or magicians or whatever, all these things that are made to make people laugh. And then like, I'd love to see the studies of what happens afterwards.
Yeah, because I mean that might lead to all the horror movies with clowns in them now.
Yeah.
You know, tightly wound town, introduce a clown, and then you just like watch everyone freak out. They laugh at first, and then all of a sudden they're like, if that annoying guy doesn't stop with a little horn, I'm going to, pull out my scythe.
Kill him with laughter or just kill him.
Yeah, why not?
One or the other, right? Well, welcome back. Today is Wednesday, October 20th, 2021. And what a wonderful day it is. And I say that knowing that I haven't actually seen outside yet. So,
oh no, it's beautiful out there.
Yeah.
Just beautiful. The traffic is roaring.
Oh, perfect.
Oh yeah, birds are pooping on things. It is a beautiful day.
Just like any other, huh? You know, real quick, I wanted to talk about that because it just popped in my head, and that's how half of these things happen, right?
That's why we talk about things.
Yeah, but the weather, you know,
yes.
it seems to be. We're talking about, as we usually do, things us humans do, right? But prescribing moods to how the weather is, and phrase a different way, letting the weather, which we have absolutely no control over, impact us and impact our days and how we're feeling and all that kind of stuff. And so much to the point where there's something called SAD, seasonal affected disorder, or something like that. Have you ever heard of SAD before?
I feel like I have. Like when you bring it up, like a little chime goes on and goes, oh yeah, you have that.
Well, it's probably hiding underneath. Yeah, you have that.
You are that.
Yeah. But yeah, it's, you know, especially in places like, I don't know, like Seattle or London or, Antarctica or whatever, places where it's like very dreary for lots of time. You know, I think especially when it's, gray and you can't see the sun and all those kind of things. And, I think it's interesting because I mean, I guess I don't know this for a fact, but I think by definition, all meaning of weather we have assigned to ourselves, right? Oh, and sunshine means happiness and funds and all that kind of stuff, whereas rain is sad and depressing and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, no, this is that little correlation is super fascinating to think about. Like, there are people who actually love the rain and they totally enjoy it. They hate the sunshine.
Well, and especially back in the day when, largely an agrarian, fancy way of saying farming and stuff like that, right? That was what people did and how they made their living. And it's like, not only do we like the rain, we have entire dances for it.
Yeah, right. We bring it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and then there's there's all those little cause and correlation kind of effects, and then you got to think too about vampires.
Like, naturally.
I mean, I naturally think of the Twilight series almost
Who
immediately.
doesn't?
Right? And of course, they hate the sun and they love the rain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you are afraid of vampires, don't go to London or
that's
Seattle.
why I live in Texas.
Yeah. I'm afraid of vampires. What brought you here?
To the south. Yeah.
Silver bullets and lots of sun.
I thought about moving to Chile or something to get close to a silver mine, but yeah.
This is the closest I could get. My Spanish wasn't good enough.
I'm still in America by being really close to Chile.
I don't have my passport.
I know. And I'm not going to get one, damn it. The government can't make me.
No, they can't. But you know what they can make you do? They can make people feast upon that lovely silver locks of hair as we give the daily morning close-up. Oh, so defined. Well, I'm Reed Garcia.
Ryder Richards of the Silver Locks.
Of the Silver Locks, and you wish that you had...
Oh, really long flowing. I wish I had waterfalls of silver locks.
I just saw an ad the other day for, male prevention of hair loss. So maybe you should just get on that, or maybe we'll just water you like a chia pet and see if it just starts
just see what happens.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I don't so far seem to be having the hair loss problem. I have the hair gain problem.
Yes.
This is lovely. Sometime around the age of 40, you could just find hairs coming out of weird places, like my forehead or whatever. They just show up wherever they want now.
Of the things to choose between loss and gain, it's probably a better one. Investing, gain, hair, gain, weight. Maybe loss, maybe gain. Right? I guess depends on where you're at.
We actually like to lose, and some things gain. It's also we want them to
dignity.
Lost, definitely. No, I mean if I lost it all, I'd just be more aerodynamic, right? So I'd move through the world faster, getting more things done.
And then maybe you think you were wasting less time.
Yeah, I would. I mean, it would save me all sorts of time shaving as well. Just think. Yeah, I could save about 1 minute every month.
The savings, and especially when you consider
compound
interest on that time.
Oh yeah, boy, because my time is worth so much moolah.
So much indeed. Well, speaking of moolah and things that don't follow, let's talk about yesterday real quick. Actually, that was intended to be a bad transition, but it actually was a perfect transition because that was what we did yesterday.
Yes, we just transitioned repeatedly.
Yes, we did. Yesterday we had a fun, completely different style format. We like to try things out here, and we set a 10-minute timer, and we talked about a topic, and we stayed completely on topic, never deviating, never having any tangents. That's a complete bold-faced lie.
Yeah, but you should still go back and watch that episode and just see how many times we deviated, even within 10 minutes.
I would be curious to have a counter. We should have that sometime. Just a ding, there they go again.
47 times in 10 minutes. How is that even possible?
If anyone could do it, we can.
Oh, yes.
Yes. If there's something we want to have more of, deviations. If there's something maybe the audience wants less of, deviations.
Could you just stay on point?
Yes. What are you talking about again? Even just right now, we're talking about yesterday. Here we are bringing it back.
Thank you for bringing it back.
Yeah, so we talked in 10-minute segments about a variety of topics. And just off the top of my head, we talked about cancel culture. We talked about dogs. Also puppies and things related around that. What are some of the other ones we
talked about? Pregnancy.
Naturally.
Yeah. I don't know why. Yes, you can do it naturally.
Yes. And we talked about one or two other things,
Yeah, I'm drawing a blank all of a sudden. This happens when I'm on camera.
Oh, naturally. And, guess what? You're live, and I'm going to stare at you, and it's going to be silent, and we're waiting for you to say something. Are you not entertained?
Yeah, I've actually heard that another tangent, but I've heard that on air silence is is the one thing that will get people to now pay attention.
Yeah, no, I've heard of that, and I've also visually with videos, same kind of thing, using a blank screen. I actually have gotten pushback from a video editor sometimes when I've intentionally left things blank with nothing on the screen for like no more than a couple of seconds, and actually sometimes maybe I'm voiceovering it, sometimes it's silent, but it's like, I need something.
Yeah. No, this happens a lot in design as well. I'll try to design something with white space in it. We just really need something on the right side of the page. I'm like what? I don't know anything, just some lines or something, And I'm like, okay, I get it. Yeah, people are very afraid of blankness, but I always kind of think that having that kind of vacuity or whatever you want to call it, that empty space.
That's not the word
space,
I would have said, but hey.
No, I'm just guessing here.
I was going to point out when you mentioned design and intentionally leaving blank space, I was going to say, maybe when God designed you, he left the big intentional blank space up there, right?
I know. And it's just like, yeah, I try to pack it full of words that don't.
And he's like, no,
sense.
That's supposed to be blank.
Like,
what are you doing?
I'm gonna fill it up.
But yeah, for those who are like, what, blank space, why would you ever need it? One easy example you can do is on your computer. If you're ever looking at an article, if you haven't noticed it before, you may notice that the article probably only takes up about 50% of the page or so, unless you have a really small screen, but especially if you're using it on a laptop or a monitor or something like that. Well, look at it like that, and then try zooming in to where the text goes all the way screen to screen, and you'll find that it's actually harder to read, and you can't get it as much. You can't chunk the information as well. You can't read it as fast. So there's something about empty space that helps us process things.
Yeah, it's also the length of the line. It's apparently there's something around 63 to 68 characters in a line that is optimal for the human mind to go, that's enough that I can read that comfortably without having to exert much effort. So a lot of the design you're now seeing in web design is based around making it as easy as possible for people to read in these little chunks.
Right. And it's worth pointing out that some of that's also around standardization, right? And I would like to think and I believe that they have done studies over the years, right? Especially as, eye tracking became more of a thing and web design and all these things have become more and more. So I can't cite them, but I believe these things are backed by studies of what works well for people and things like that. But one of the other things that kind of is cool is because they do things these ways and because they chunk things out in these ways, you actually can, your eyes can take a snapshot of the thing and you can actually get it, even if, for example, all the words were slightly misspelled or they're missing certain letters or things like that, because your brain automatically fills all that stuff in for you, which is really cool.
Yeah, I mean, yours might. I've got this empty space.
Oh, good.
Yeah, not so much.
Well, before we get any further, I did want us to reference our challenge from yesterday. And, tomorrow we're going to start where we're going to actually have that challenge recorded. Maybe even we'll just play back the video or we'll write it down or something.
Man, yeah.
We have the technology. We'll figure it out.
We have a pencil.
Yes.
Yeah, we can do this.
But off the top of our heads, the challenge from yesterday was we were talking about cancel culture. We were talking about pregnancy and how people have opinions on names and things like that. And, people say what it's going to be and you instantly like, oh, I don't like that or I do like that. Yeah. And all these kind of one of the trends we extracted from yesterday was, taking something and having that initial judgment for it. And my challenge was for you guys at home to examine something inside, that you were like, maybe I feel a little too strongly about that thing, and let me think about why do I think that? Where did that information come from? And then maybe being open to like, okay, well, maybe I could move a little more towards the middle on that thing, right? And being open to that, and instead of just immediately clamping down, and be like, no, that's how it's going to be, because the truth is, oftentimes very much in the middle, right? And the first thing that a lot of people think of when we're talking about the middle and extremes is politics, but this could be
Malcolm in the middle.
Yeah, Malcolm in the middle, exactly. Middle child,
Yes.
But yeah, being in the middle is generally where the truth starts to lie, and so being open to changing your mind, and some of that might just be your opinion on somebody or something about them, right?
Yeah, I think that, really one of the things we would like is just to examine whatever the heck it is. it might lead you not to the middle, might lead you even further in a completely different direction, right?
Or to the opposite side
Yeah, it might
altogether.
right. I mean, what would happen if we were able to do that, right?
Yeah.
Because, if you had to sort of go, you know what, I thought a lot about this, and I totally agree with what I've been believing for the last 38 years of my life.
Yeah, well,
Like,
that's one of the things that we like to do as humans is we like to group things. Like we naturally like to group things together. And so to use a political example as well, like that's one thing that people like to do. It's called straight ticket voting. Like I don't want to have to do the extra work and to think and to look into one of all these things, or maybe I just am trusting that these people who are say they're from the same group of people that I'm from, I hope they think close enough the same as me so I can just vote along those lines, when in reality for a lot of people, not for everyone, right, but for a lot of people, maybe one or two of those issues you would maybe vote differently on once if you knew a little bit more about.
Yeah, I think I would vote differently on almost every issue. Like rather than just as far as when I go through them, it's a hodgepodge.
Yeah.
And this is a problem with really stopping to think about something, is you realize that you don't agree with most of the stances any platform has. There was a while back I looked into something, and it was kind of interesting to see how political parties actually gravitated towards a stance. They tend to know that this certain group of people with this certain group of beliefs, that makes up a majority of the population, or 10% or whatever, and these is a strongly held belief, and so they will grab that position and incorporate it into the platform in order to gain those votes. So you might have contradictory beliefs. I always kind of think that, like, the stances on abortion and gun control and some of these things don't seem to align with other values. They seem contradictory. And so I'm just kind of like, well, how can you have all these different values that are all somehow you're logically trying to hold them together under this umbrella, when I think logically they don't make sense together?
Yeah. Or like, for example, we should provide all of these things for all of the people, but then just not have a balanced budget and have a way to pay for it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's really kind of funny. It's like, no, we're about the people, but we can't do the math to get the budget straight, or whatever, and you're just like, that would probably help. Yeah, it's sort of contradictory how many weird little items that are talking points, and then what people tend to do though is vote based off of the most emotional topics.
Yeah. Well, and we're talking about politics because it's a very easy thing to talk about where people have stances on things and stuff like that. But this could go to many other things, right? We also talked about drugs yesterday, or 2 days ago. Was that yesterday? A
couple days ago.
So yeah, that's another thing. What your view on drugs? Another possibility is your view on sex and what you should or shouldn't do, or what is or isn't right, or and in general, I'll just, so people know what my biases are. I think what you do in your privacy of your own home that's not affecting other people, that I think that's your right to do, right? That's my stance on it, whether that's drugs, sex, whatever. Now the whole how much is it affected
meth in my home?
Cooking meth, depends. Depends. Do you have the right explosive controls in place?
Yeah, right. Are you saving your neighbors in case this blows up?
Are you an ex-chemistry teacher who's going to think about every little thing?
I know. Are you Breaking Bad?
Speaking of shaving, I mean, he had just the nicest of hair, and then it was just completely
poor guy.
Yeah. That's what happens when you do meth, I guess.
You lose the hair on top of your head.
Well, what a great recap we did. Thank you very much. Let's go ahead and roll that intro.
Oh.
Helpful for life. And we're back, and I think I said I'm Reed Garcia already.
Oh, you probably are, but I'm Ryder Richards.
Silverlocks. Oh, Silverlocks. That's his new name. It sounds much more distinguished than Graylocks.
Yeah, doesn't it though? And of course, it also makes me think of lox and bagels and stuff like that. So it makes me hungry.
Yes.
And that's really the most important thing to think about.
Yes, hunger.
Hunger in your belly. And
well, you know what else is important to think about? Our lovely audience. And, sometimes when we're just staring here, locked into each other's eyes, it's easy for us to get into our own zone. But I want us to point out some of the lovely comments that we got. Danielle wants to know, how could we miss so many Taylor Swift blank space references? And, That is a great question. Probably because I have to do so much to counteract how much Taylor Swift that Danielle has in her life that I kind of put it into that blank space in my head in a box,
Taylor who?
Yeah, exactly. And of course, we have Kenny over here referencing another band, The Middle
Oh, yes.
by Jimmy Eat World.
Well
hey,
done, Kenny.
Don't knock yourself out yet. You know what I'm saying? Right. So today, what do we want to talk about today? Because we could talk about anything, as we've clearly
there's
demonstrated.
So many, with the expertise on politics, if you didn't notice, I just went totally abstract at some point. It's like there's things that people think and then they think.
Yes, and then they think about them.
And then that's how they make decisions.
And the audience is surprised that this comes from the guy with the blank space in his head. Let's be real.
I know. It's like some of these topics are kind of touchy, and then I don't have recall of whatever this specific thing is, right? Because I read articles, I think about things, but like, how am I going to go back and find that specific thing?
Yeah. Well, I want to say I'm proud of you for reading articles and thinking about things. I think that is a great thing that you do.
If only I could remember those
Gold
things.
star.
Thank you for me. Yes.
Yes. Well, if you want to know how to remember them, write them in your Rome notebook.
Oh,
Ooh,
Rome.
fancy.
I've heard of this.
Yes, you have. Yes. So let's just, I don't know, let's grab something out of the ether. Let's talk about highlights. For example,
How could I remember something?
Exactly. Maybe you would highlight something in an article. Man, sometimes you realize when someone is tossing you a softball, and other times you don't.
I know. I was really trying to segue there.
Yes.
But anyway, our chemistry failed. We got stuck looking lovingly and adoringly into each other.
That is partially our appeal. It's like, hey, these guys, sometimes they're really smooth. Sometimes they just look like idiots.
I hope that is appealing to the world.
Yes. And in case you're wondering, world, what this podcast is about, some people strive to be the girls next door. We strive to be the idiots next door.
Yes,
the educated idiots next door.
And I'm so happy, like we're recording this. I'm so happy your neighbors aren't nearby. I'm sure they would just find it super annoying if they had to listen to this every morning.
Yeah.
But we're looking that there might be some audience out there, maybe 1/15% that really enjoys this kind of idiocy.
Which is higher than you are percentage of Native American. So
hey,
it's something.
There we go.
Which we talked about that, I think,
Yes.
yesterday too. Oh, man, what a coverage. So highlights. So, is highlighting something that you do when you read a book or write an article or whatever?
I'm an underliner.
An underliner,
with
huh?
physical books. Yeah, I go through, underline, put little stars and asterisks in the margins. I do things like that. So that's a kind of highlighting. But lately I've been using Medium to do a lot of reading. So I read articles on there, and they have this little technology that lets you digitally highlight articles.
Okay.
And so that's pretty cool. And then I just bumped into this other technology called Readwise. And what it does is it pulls the highlights from your Medium articles, and then it can feed them back to you.
Yes, I actually started using Readwise a month or so ago, and to take it one step further, I have Readwise hooked up with an app called Notion, which is a database software. And so Readwise automatically comes into my Notion, which basically gives me, it's a database is the fancy way of saying it, but another way to think of it is just like an Excel document that has all of my highlights. And I also use Air. AIRR when I'm listening to podcasts, and that allows me to take clips. And so it said, I press a button to take an air clip, and then air quote. Sorry, I was like, that sounded wrong. They call it an air quote. And then if I want to write like a little note, I can. And that also gets synced via Readwise to my Notion. And so now I have this table where I can look and see, hey, show me all the things from my podcast in the last week, or hey, show me this, and I can filter it the various ways and see all of those things.
So when that sounds brilliant. I think I'm just going to steal all those techniques, because it is one of the problems is like when I read a physical book, I go through and I underline things, and it kind of keeps my mind tracking with the text as I'm reading. Because you're talking about being able to grab chunks of it, but some of the books I read are kind of dense, and so I like to go through, and it kind of keeps me active. It keeps me like tuned in. But then I very seldom go back and pull those highlighted or underlined areas out to do anything with them.
Yeah, and that's you're not alone in that, right? And another similar concept is there's this term called fleeting notes, right? Mm-hmm. And this is one of the things that Rome research helps to counteract. But the way that most people write notes, myself included before I started using Rome, is you have somewhere that you record some type of notes. And for me, outside of school, I took notes in school, but even then, like I was writing them in a notebook, right? And then guess what happened to that notebook? After I was done with that class, it sat on a shelf for a while. Maybe I moved 4 to 5 times with it and then finally threw it out because like, why am I keeping this thing, right?
Yeah.
Classic. That in textbooks, right? Or, after that, I didn't really write notes, but then when I started working, I got a notebook and I would write some stuff down, like if you're in a meeting or key things, and maybe if I was good, like things I needed to do. But then I stopped that, but now, so then when you write something down, maybe it's in your phone, on your Apple Notes, or on your laptop, on your notes. But part of it is you put some notes here, you put some notes there, you put some notes there, or even within, say, a notebook or a OneNote or something like that. You put something in a place, but then you don't think about where it is, and you have to actively work to go find the thing.
Yes.
And so this leads to what's called a fleeting note. So you take the note, but then you never use it again. And it's useful in the time and maybe a short period afterwards, but then you never use it again. You heard that terminology before?
I think I kind of stumbled across it in How to Take Smart Notes. I think either that or through the Rome book clubs that we've been going through. They will actually talk about taking fleeting notes. And then they also sort of contrast that with permanent notes.
Yeah, and another term used is called an evergreen note as well. And the idea of a permanent note is actually, or I'll talk about an evergreen note because I'm not 100% sure if it's exactly the same as a permanent note. But an evergreen note is something that you write on a topic that is something like, I'm going to write on this and think on this for a long period of time, which I think is just cool, even declaring like, hey, this is something that I want to add to over time and think about over time. Like, I feel like that's just such a unique thing, and I had never done that before. Had you?
No, because I assume if I'm interested in something, I will continue to be interested in it over time. And interestingly, that I wouldn't, if I'm passionate in the moment, I think I don't need to remind myself later.
Yeah.
But sometimes I will go through old things and be like, oh yeah, I was really into that.
Yeah.
Like, what happened to that desire? What happened to that drive in that direction?
Well, it's so easy to forget all of the things you do, especially if you're doing like a wide variety of things. And here's another pro tip for you guys at home. If you have a job and you are trying to keep track of what you're doing, and you may, regardless of whether or not you want another future job, but especially if you think you'll ever want to change another job, I want you to create either an Excel spreadsheet or a Word document or something, and I want you to write down all of the things you do. And you might be surprised just how many things you do. And one of the things I encourage you to do it in Excel because it's easy to kind of have a line and maybe have some extra notes, and you could have like your groupings and all that kind of stuff and manipulate it and things like that. But whatever works for you to get it on paper. And I would encourage you to go back, look through your calendar, look through your emails, and record all the things that you did. And if you do any kind of time tracking through your work, for example, when I was at Boeing, I said I worked on this project, this project, this project. I went back and I looked through my charge lines. I said, oh, okay. Oh, I forgot. I did that one thing it was just like a 10-hour project, but it was completely different from what I did, and I just completely forgot about it. Have you ever had times like that where you've looked back on your work and you're like, oh, forgot I did that?
Yes, yeah. I've done a lot of kind of zany stuff with my art career, hopped around, been parts of different groups and things like that. And sometimes I will forget like an entire like 3-year experience working with like a collective or something that I did.
Wow.
And I'm like, whoa, we did a bunch of amazing stuff, but
that is a big empty space in their head.
Huge. I've got the biggest empty space. Yeah, don't say anything. Yeah, no, I've find that there are entire chunks of my life that have to really be pushed hard to get triggered to come back so that I'll pay attention to them.
Yeah.
And it might be that, somebody asked me the other day about, they're like, well, I'm a curator and I do this, this, and this. And I was like, yeah, I've curated about 200 exhibits.
Wow.
And they were just like, what? And I was like, well, yeah, I ran about 5 galleries for about 10 years.
Dang.
That's a lot of shows that you put together over time. And that's a skill set that sometimes I forget that I have.
Yeah.
Because I haven't been doing it recently.
That's very impressive, by the way. And, and part of that might just come from doing it every day, right? We were just sitting here talking. I was like, man, episode 17 already. And I was comparing it to a popular podcast that I watched, a guy I found from a list, which is very rare for me. But I was like, I'm going to look up some comedy podcasts. And I looked this guy up. Adam Buxton. Is that his name?
Yeah, the
The Adam Buxton
Adam Ruins
podcast.
Everything?
No.
Or-
This is the British guy, the British comedian.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's the Adam Buxton podcast, but I could be wrong. But anyways,
I can see the cover art in my
yeah, I
mind.
can see
I'm
his
a
face.
visual
It's his
guy.
face on a
Yeah.
blue background.
Yeah.
His last name's definitely Buxton, so I got that
Okay,
part
yeah.
right. But anyways, I was looking. I was like, man, 183 episodes. That's a lot. And then when we sat down here, it's like episode 17. Man, we're already 1/10 of the way there, and we just started like 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, there's something about, quantity over quality. I think that's what we're going for.
Yeah,
here.
quantity over quality. Well, and we talked about it before when we were talking about art and the types of art that you make, and especially when it comes to pictures and things like that. We talked about how there's one approach, which is I'm going to try and take the perfect picture. I'm going to try and make the perfect painting versus, no, I'm going to take 2,000 pictures, and within that 2,000 pictures, I'm probably going to get some pretty good pictures. So same kind of thing. So to talk about highlights, right? So some of that is highlighting the things that you've done in your life, right? That's an important thing to do. And so to wrap up the little thing I was talking about was having that document where you go through and you talk about all the things that you do, and guess what? Do it today. Set some time aside. Whether it's not today, schedule it. Give yourself 30 minutes or an hour to do that initial work, and then after that, have it once a week or once a month where you just add the little bit extra that you did, right? And then it becomes just this running list. And guess what? If you're ever feeling down on yourself, or you're wondering like, I suck, I'm not doing anything, like you can go look at all these things I've done. If you're ever going to go apply for a job, the resume writing, which I know so many people dread, your resume is basically written for you. You just got to extract the parts. If you want to do an extra good job when you're writing the things you did, add some names next to it of people that you worked with, which could potentially be people you work with in the future. You could ask them for testimonials, for advice, all these types of things. So it's a really good whatever what the word is, a thing you do, activity, really good activity. And I actually would like to shout out my mom. She actually was the one who first told me to do that, and she told me to do that early on when I was working in internships, and that was a very, very cool, good tip that I encourage you guys to apply. So let's talk about some other aspects of highlighting. Let's jump back to the article thing real quick. We're talking about highlighting, whether it be a physical or a digital way. One other tool online that I wanted to mention, which I haven't really messed with that much yet, but I really like the idea of. It's a tool called Hypothesis, and there's a missing letter in there somewhere, or I think it's hypothe.es or something like that. When you Google it, it'll come up. But Hypothesis, and what it is it runs on top of any website, and you can then highlight, and it'll save your highlights and things like that. You can also have comments and things like that. But on top of that, it has a public side. And so if you want to, you could see all of the places people have highlighted things. People have comments. They could have discussions about things. And that's a tool that really excites me. And I look forward to trying it out a little more, especially on some of these topics that are, maybe controversial, or things where it's like, oh, where did he get that piece of information? I had my mom told me the other day, she's like, this guy had this article and he said something about this person's inner thoughts and things like that, but I don't know where it came from. And she did a great job trying to go and look for the source, but she couldn't find it after a little while. And so then she's like, I gave it a good college try, but I couldn't find it. Well, something like this Hypothesis tool would be great, where people could point out, God forbid the author themselves left the source in the document. Like, come on.
Yeah, there is something that I actually do like about the academic style of writing, where you actually cite your sources. It doesn't, you don't have to cite things all the time, but man, it sure does help whenever somebody's trying to do a deeper dive into that area.
For sure. And that's one area where when I was creating Kickstart Your Kitchen, one of the really important, which is an online cooking course, one of the really important things to me was that it was science backed, and we weren't doing things about the myths that were going on. Things like, if you want to know how done your steak is, you press it to see, or you use your finger like this. Like, these are things that may work in certain situations, but they're just not good advice to have. Or other things like you might have heard, like, the pasta water needs to be as salty as the sea, and it's like, is there any truth to that? I'm not going to tell you. You'll have to find out, of course. But those are the types of things where, as I started researching it, guess what you see? you see lots and lots of people saying those things, right? And there was actually one time when I was creating the credit card guide. It's called Swipe Right. It's a little play on like
nice.
swipe the credit card, swipe right like Tinder, and things like that, which is on our website. It's completely free, by the way.
Whoa, hey, value.
It really is. It's like a freaking textbook. So if you're doing any sort of thing on credit cards, or if you're not doing anything sort of on credit cards, you probably should be. So you can check this guide out, and it has all sorts of things on there. And it within that guide, I was looking things up, and I saw this time where it was like, oh, this thing, and it was on all the sites. I'm like, that doesn't sound right to me. So I actually called up the SEC. I went and looked up a person, and I wrote an email, and they actually called me back within like a day or two. I was like, wow, I wasn't really expecting that, but this is awesome. And so I went literally all the way to the source, which was, and by the way, it took a decent amount of work to get to that point, right? But that was a cool thing, you know. And I was like, that was one of my main point. Of course, I got slightly distracted as I was saying it, was as I was reading these things, you get these good sources like the New York Times and all these big publications that are well regarded and things like that. Well, they'd mention like a study or something, but they don't give very much information around it. It's like, oh, on this study done by this group. They don't give a year. They don't give a title. They don't give anything. And I'm like, you guys are supposed to be the example of what journalism is. At least give me a one with the footnote that says on the bottom.
Right.
Like,
well, and then what is really fun too is you get into these loops where people are all citing something like a Medium article,
right,
or a New York Times article that said something, and then when you finally do track it down after maybe an hour of searching, and you get back to the original study. That's not what the original study was about.
Right. They changed the words a little bit. They took something out of context, all of these things, right? Or they interpreted themselves. And so that is something that we're very conscious of here at Helpful for Life. But a lot of people are not conscious of. And that's one of the reasons why I've created Helpful for Life, was to help with some of this stuff, right? So highlighting. So when it comes to books and articles and things like that, I don't know the study off the top of my head, but I want to say I heard that the actual act of highlighting does not like really help your attention. Have you heard that before?
No.
Okay.
And if I did, I just ignored it.
Yeah. I highlighted that part and I forgot it.
What?
Well, we won't talk about that because, again, as we were just talking about, I don't have the source, but Google it, look it up, and find that original source. But regardless of whether or not the act itself does anything for you, I typically think that it does at least help you stay focused, right? And I'm sure there's plenty of people I've seen where they're just mindlessly highlighting every line, especially like back in school and stuff like that.
I do kind of love that. It's sort of if you're going to highlight everything, then it's the same as not highlighting anything, right? And so this is a kind of fun little thing that people tend to do. And so sometimes I could understand, like, I'm just creating this out of thin air, but I could understand the idea that highlighting doesn't actually help you retain the knowledge. What I'm interested in, though, is that it can help me with the act of actually reading. It can keep me engaged with the page. And so that's a little bit different than, reading an entire chapter and being like, you know what, these two pieces of information stood out to me, and now I will highlight those.
Right.
That's a much different practice.
Yeah. No, I would tend to agree with that statement, but I'm not sure. So yeah, the nice thing though, because we were talking about some of these digital tools, and we talked about the fleeting notes, and we talked about the idea of something that's an evergreen note or a permanent note, where it's a topic that you want to contribute to over time, you want to think about over time, and then using these tools that we were talking about to extract information from the things that you're consuming. Because I would agree, like, once I started doing these things, it completely changed the way that I think and also the way that I consume. And not even if I don't go do something with those clips, it is changing the way that I'm thinking about it, because it's like, I'm marking that as important. I remember that thing. And also, I know that is now there. So if I ever want to find it again, I can. And that's a trap that some people fall into when they're using a tool like Roam or something like that. They're so worried about doing it like the right way or following these conventions or doing it as like, yeah, like there are ways you can do things more efficiently. Even within a book, there are techniques, I'm sure, that are more effective for highlighting. But in my mind, it's more important that you are capturing it at all, because guess what? You can go back later and you can improve it, you can change it, you can mix it up. But
you can even delete it if you want.
You can even delete it if you want, yeah. And so using those tools to highlight things can be very good. So I did want to point out how I would define highlight is, a highlight is something that is often it's a slightly different. It's brought out in some way, and in a lot of ways, it's used some sort of light or color that is brighter than the area around it to highlight it. Are there other types of highlights you can think of besides just the the highlighter on the page?
Oh man, think about things like a highlight reel in sports, right? Where you're distinguishing something, but you're sort of segmenting it off and capturing it. So maybe it's not sort of surrounded by light, but the highlight reel is kind of the same idea. You're just taking these snippets and stitching them back together to sort of show something amazing, the best of the best.
Yeah, and you could argue that social media sometimes acts as a highlight reel of people's lives,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so there's good things about having highlights. For example, is bringing out and identifying, oh, these are the parts that I really want to see. Those are the plays that I want to see. Those are the clips from that movie or comedy special, or for example, SNL. Like, they chop up their clips, and it's like, well, me personally, like, one, I never was someone to go watch SNL in its entirety very often, but once they started doing the YouTube thing, like, is like, well, why would I go watch it when I can just see the ones that go viral and see the ones that are actually funny, because that's just kind of the nature of how that show works. And
Yeah, that's sort of we're in a time now where the world is doing the highlighting for you, which is both good and bad, right? The strength of it is that if you think only cream rises to the top or whatever, but whatever is the most popular will rise to the top, and you'll end up seeing that thing, and then you can sort of share in the communal laughter.
Right.
But on the other hand, I don't know, when you're relying on other people to do your highlighting and note taking for you, then you're probably missing something. And that's, it's larger context, it's all these kind of things, and it's fine maybe for something like SNL where you're laughing about something, but there's other parts of our lives where I don't want somebody giving me just the highlights of, say, somebody's political theory before I vote for them.
Yeah, or another example was in like nonfiction books, where it's like there's all these services out there that condense it and say, oh, here's the main takeaway. And for some books, like, honestly, like, that's the way you should consume it. Like, that book just doesn't add that much more other than those things. And then other books, we talked about story in the past, a few weeks ago, and that's one of the times where it's like, hey, I need this concept, but yeah, that sounds like it makes sense, but it's not really going to change you or change your mind or have you act any differently until you hear and you see all of the examples of how that could relate to you and your life. And then that kind of helps drive that concept home. And also, by giving all of that context and information around it, like, now you remember that whole group, kind of like we were talking about earlier. Remembering that whole group can help you remember parts of it as well, right?
Yeah, I think that's the kind of a fantastic thing that our mind does, right? Is once you sort of vaguely remember something, and then, like, for instance, I can see a book jacket, and all of a sudden I can start remembering the contents. And the more time I spend thinking about that book, the more contents I remember, which is a kind of a fun way that our memory works, right?
Right.
Something doesn't occur to us at all, and then we get hit with the right sort of trigger, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, cue.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden the memories start flooding back in.
And it's really cool to see what type of those things happen. And honestly, that's one of my favorite things about this show. And I just want to point out a story a friend just told me yesterday, where they were at work, and there's some new people that came in, and they were training them to do some new things. And it was a very validating time for that person, because kind of like we were talking about earlier with the list of things that you do and the list of things that you've done in the past. And they're sitting there explaining all of this to this person, and they're like, I forgot I knew all of these things. And, and they went from feeling like, am I going to get fired? I'm not worried. I'm worried about, am I providing enough value?
Oh,
And then, a week or two later, these new people come in, and it's like these people are coming to them for help, and they're helping train them and all these types of things. And it's like, oh, no, that's good. I do remember these things.
Yeah.
And
I do have knowledge and value in the world.
Exactly. And so that's one of my favorite things about this show, is like, it's great because we have all these conversations ranging from literally anything. That's one of the downsides of the show, is we talk about such a wide variety of things, but it's also one of the plus sides of the show. When someone asks me, like, what is it and what do we talk about, I'm like, well, it's about life, so pretty much anything goes.
Yeah, right. You bring up a topic, we'll talk about it.
Yeah. I mean, we've talked about boners, we've talked about weed, we've talked about marriage, we've talked about buying houses. It's all over the place.
Yeah, and we've even talked about cancel culture and have yet to have been canceled.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's one of the beauty of of what we do is you fly under the radar enough until you.
As long as we stick with only 2 viewers.
Well, and another great thing about us is we're meta, so we give people all the reasons. Like, yeah, you guys are probably going to cancel us for that, but we're acknowledging it, so now you can't cancel it for us. But yeah, so having these conversations and I've really enjoyed how much it's helped me think about all of these things that I've read, I've seen, these experiences I've had in my life that I never would have thought about before because we're not having these type of conversations, or we're not forcing ourselves to think about all these various things. And I hope that is something that that I'm helping you do as well, but also for our viewers at home. That's something that I really want for us to accomplish with this show. We want to talk about things. We want you to be thinking about things. We want you to realize all the things you already know, and also maybe realizing, hey, I thought I knew something about that, but I don't know as much as I did, which is there's a name for that, paradox or something like that, which we're going to blank on right now. But basically the summary of it is the more you know, you realize how little you know, right?
Right. And this also sort of shows up with confidence, right? The people, there's a really fun study where they actually showed people videos of how to juggle. And then these people were like, I now think I can juggle. And they actually go, oh, yeah, I watched the video on it 5 times in a row.
Right.
So I can pretty much juggle. And then they get over there, and of course they can't juggle. And then they're horribly offended that they can't juggle, right? But because they had watched somebody else doing it, they thought they knew how to do it. And there's this kind of weird thing that our brains do where we actually think by watching somebody, we end up getting some of the same sort of triggers or whatever it is, the chemical reactions that happen with you actually doing the event. And then we tend to gain the same level of confidence, which is just a very niche. It's not the same thing we were talking about earlier, where people kind of assume they know something, and then there's that kind of valley and arc where they think that they don't know, and then they realize eventually that they are super duper into it and they're at the top cutting edge of their field. But I do kind of like the idea that the human brain is pretty tricky, and it's one of the things why people watch a lot of DIY videos. They watch people creating things, and then they think after a while, you know what, I can do that too.
Yeah.
And so that's very tricky, because once you try to put it into practice, we find out that we can't, and we're actually pretty horrible at it.
Yes, and I will point out for those of you at home, I would encourage you to do DIY stuff, but just know it's generally not as easy as they make it look in that 5-minute video, right?
Never.
If I could have $1 for that, whatever that price of that multiplier is from, hey, this video was 5 minutes versus how long it actually took me to do the thing, yes, I would be a very rich man.
Yeah, right. Well, and I'm of course doing frame out in the workshop right now, so
which is a way of saying that you're creating the walls for within your shed, right?
Yes. So I'm creating the walls right now. So doing 2x4 construction for the walls. The space itself is already insulated, but I've been also sort of toying with the idea of insulating the office as well to keep it even more sort of environmentally controlled. But what's so fun about this is there's little things like I took all the measurements, but I've got these cross beams in the wall, and so I build out a section, and it goes up to the cross beam, and then the cross beam is it's about a 1/4 inch thick, and then I build another section on top of that because I didn't want to give up the space and put a wall in front of it. So I'm building it straight into there. Well, I do all the math, and somehow I come out and the whole thing is a 1/2 inch higher than it's supposed to be.
Oh no!
So
you have that problem often.
Actually,
things are a 1/2 inch longer.
This is a first for me.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I find this to be really interesting that the theoretical math doesn't line up with the real world.
Yeah, well, that's a very important thing to point out because there are things like tolerances involved in manufacturing, and especially when you're putting together multiple things. That was a big thing that I really appreciate I'll call it my career before this, because it. When you're designing things for space, when you're designing things that are meant to last for years and years and years in the harshest environment possible, like you get to learn about all of the things that go into it. And one of the things is tolerance, right? And so when you have, let's just take an easy example, a simplified example, for example, of let's say you're building a car, right? And let's just pretend the car is 3 pieces. It's the center part, the front bumper, and the back bumper.
Okay.
Well, all right. So the front bumper is supposed to be, let's say, 6 inches thick, and the back bumper is supposed to be 6 inches thick. But in reality, when you're manufacturing it, it could be 7, it could be 5, right? And that car in the middle, it's supposed to be 5 feet long, but it could be 5'3", it could be 4'9", whatever. It could be off by that little bit. And so good designers will accommodate for that. And I will give a great example of bad designers, people who make assemblable furniture. Every single time you're
Oh,
going to do
man.
that and the freaking bolt doesn't fit in that hole, you're like, why didn't you guys think about tolerance? This is your job.
Yeah. No, it's amazing as well. Which this is the thing with IKEA that everyone sort of always jumps on, is that like how difficult it is to put IKEA furniture together because it's all flat packed and it shows up and they've got these cute little instructions with little kind of rotund workmen, putting things together, and yet they give you this crazy little Allen key,
Right.
and you're just like, there is no way.
Yes.
And it takes hours to assemble the furniture sometimes, and it's kind of fun. Like it reminds me of playing with Legos when I was a kid, and you would get the massive Lego set, and then you could build you have the instructions that come out and you build all of it. And I sometimes think to myself, as a kid I was so good at doing that with Legos, why doesn't IKEA hire Lego to help them put together
That's
their
a great
furniture?
question.
Because like I was just thinking to myself, this should not be this difficult.
Right.
And when we start getting into things like tolerances, we also start getting into like movement. When you're dealing with things like wood, it breathes and expands and contracts, and
Based on
I mean,
moisture level
yes,
and all these types of things.
and of course almost all materials do this.
Mhm.
And so it's really kind of fascinating to think about the sort of theoretical side of thinking you know how to do something and then actually doing it. So this is all to circle back around to this podcast, having these conversations here. I mean, we're talking about what we would love you, the audience, to actually gain from this, but I think also Reed and I are gaining a lot. Like not only talking about these things, but doing it every day. It's building up a different kind of muscle, a different kind of skill set. We're also having to draw information out of our brain and put it into the world. And until you do that, you maybe have assumptions, and then when you see them come out of your head, you're like, oh, well, that was dumb.
Yeah, or at the very least, as you try to articulate them, there's inherently some sort of difference between how you think it in your head and how you got the words out. And
Yes.
and yeah, I think I had another friend tell me the other day who's like, yeah, I'm not putting my words together right. That doesn't make sense. It's not like it sounds in my head. And it's like, oh, well, yeah. I mean, but some of that is improved by practice, right? You're doing it more often. You're using that muscle, like you said. So yeah, and I would encourage all of you at home to be doing that same thing. Like even if it's just something as silly as, hey, let me tell you guys about this show that I've been watching in the morning, and they talk about all these things,
Yeah. If you need a highlight, just reference our show.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, I heard these guys talking about this, and then send them to our show, and then they can get angry at us for not being able to provide the source material.
Perfect. I
Yeah.
like it. And I will point out that right now we're on YouTube, and this will also eventually be in podcast form and on a whole bunch of different platforms. But I'll point out within YouTube, you can there's a clip function. You can click clip, and you can extract a certain section of the podcast. So if there's a certain part that you'd like to share with somebody, or you'd like to post on social media, if you do, please tag us. We'd love to have that conversation with you, and let us know what you think, and maybe share it with somebody, and maybe have a conversation about it. Maybe you send something to somebody and say, hey, I've been thinking about our vacation coming up, and here's this video that I saw on vacation.
Yeah.
Maybe we should look about that and think about it and talk about it before we plan our next one. Something like that.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. Like if we can start, helping you sort of populate these little sections of your life. So, and I think the idea with bookmarking and clipping and all these things is that we can kind of use our mind. We used to have to use it as a file cabinet and put the actual documents in it, but now we can kind of just use it to point to things.
Yes, and I'm really glad you brought that up because it made me think of Rome again, which I'm going to talk about in 1 second. But the last thing I wanted to say about the clips is, the thing about highlighting is we have created this source material here, right? And we're going to extract certain clips that are going to make it easy for you guys to share. But the thing I really like about seeing how people highlight stuff, which within this Rome book club has been awesome because we are all reading these books at the same time, and you can go and see people's notes. And so you can actually see, and you can follow people's train of logic. You can see how they think, and you can see how that evolves over time. So you were talking earlier about how I see the jacket in my head, and then I jump to this chapter, and like you're kind of drilling down. And the way I see that, and the way I use that in Rome, as a lot of people do is you actually have bullets that are indented, and the first bullet is the name of the book, and then underneath that is maybe some subsection, and then you just kind of keep indenting down, and that is kind of how your brain works. And so that's the beauty of Rome, is it mimics the way your brain works pretty well. And then when you're using it every day, they have these ways for you to very easily search and query these things. And so you don't have to remember, oh, I don't remember the title, I don't remember the name. I used to remember one of the things that's out there, and I will definitely share more about this, and I'll share some videos about it. But for example, the other day, I did all this research on keyboards, and I found out that there's this type of key called cherry brown or something like that. And so I was trying to remember, I was telling somebody they have all these things and there's weird names, but all I could remember was the word brown. And so I typed in the word brown, and then I looked and I scrolled, and then I could see, oh, keyboard research, oh, tactile keys, oh, this certain type of keys, brown. Right there, within a second, I had that thing. I could pop into it. I could see all of my notes and all of the context around it. If I wanted to, I could jump back to the day that I wrote that note. I could see all the things I was doing that day. One thing that I'm not doing the best of, but I want to include more and more in my notes, is how am I feeling that day? What am I thinking about? And there are some people who go as far as like, wow, I've realized that, when I haven't been on vacation in 7 months, I've got a lot more depressed. Or, hey, I've realized that, I hadn't had sex in 3 months, and, my mood has been worse or whatever. Or maybe it's like, oh, wow, every time I'm around Ryder, I feel better about myself because my empty space is smaller than his, So there's all these types of associations you can do through that as well. But the last point I wanted to make, sorry to bogart the mic here for a second, was one of my favorite things is seeing how other people think and seeing what people find important and seeing what people find shareable, because we're going to do some highlighting ourselves, but we want you guys to do some highlighting as well. And so, because we don't know what you're going to resonate most with. Maybe it's just one of these little jokes about, Ryder's hair, or his finding extra length where he didn't think he had it, or maybe it's something more meaningful, or maybe it's some complete aside that we thought was some throwaway comment, but you really resonate with.
Right. One of the things that I always kind of find fun is when you're talking with other people, right? Then
what's that like?
Yeah. Well, this is my first time to actually try it. No, I just really enjoy it when they sort of casually throw out an idea that they have for years have just kind of assumed is and that I have never thought about before in my life, right? So either they've been raised with it or something else. And, and it can be something like we're reading these books right now about sort of career advice, range, and so good you can't be ignored, or so good they can't ignore you. And so we're in the midst of reading these, and somebody's kind of like, oh, well, they're confusing love and passion. And I'm just like, what? And like my brain just sort of breaks for a second, and then I have to reset and sort of think about this. Or when they'll say something like, oh yeah, in Europe we don't try to get our love or passion through our career, and so these books are not popular in Europe. This is only an American thing. And
so fascinating.
So fascinating, because for most of our lives we have been living under this kind of premise or this idea that somehow our career needs to be feeding us with love and meaning and purpose and all these kind of things. And in other countries they're like, no, that's ridiculous. Why would you ever think that?
Yeah.
I love it when that happens.
I think that is one of my favorite things about being a part of the Rome Book Club, is because there are people from all over the world. Mm-hmm. And also there are people who think about things and they have these ideas, and then they're sharing all these different cultures, and we're learning from each other. And it's great. And the best part of all of it, it's even completely free. I mean, that's not the best part. I'd gladly pay money for this.
I would pay for it too.
Yeah.
I mean, just it's really fun to sort of think that there's all these smart people having brilliant conversations, and they want you to be a part of it.
Yeah.
And you can jump in there. You can see what their homework looks like. You can spend time on your own homework. And midway through it, then I just keep thinking, like, there are people here that I could learn from, and I can grow, and I can be better as well. I can ask some questions. Everyone's open. Everyone's friendly. And I'm like, this is the benefit of the internet. Right?
Yes, it is, in my opinion, one of, if not the best things happening on the internet. And I think it's going to grow, and it's going to change, and it's going to morph, and it's going to learn, because this is people learning how to work together in a new way, and interstitially, not at the same time. Asynchronously is another way to say that, and across different continents, across different time zones, working on a problem together and trying to do it at scale. That is inherently what Rome, the company, is trying to figure out. And this book club is one of the ways that they're testing the waters. And it's so cool to see. This is Rome Book Club 6th, but to see and hear about the progression, I just joined on 5 as a writer, but seeing the progression from 1 to 6, each time they're learning about new ways to do things, better conventions, and all these types of things. And it's such a cool thing to be a part of. But one of the things that I wanted to point out is this is possible for you, anyone. Like, it doesn't have to be this Rome Book Club or whatever, but we live in the day and age where in your pocket you have a device you could literally pick up and talk to or comment or text with anyone in the entire world. And I would encourage you guys to, this is a secondary challenge, right? And I'm saying secondary just because I already came up with one, but talk to somebody new, talk to a stranger. And it could be someone out on the street. You could be going to a coffee shop. You could be talking.
Perhaps a clown.
Yeah, a clown.
Yeah,
see if you can find a clown.
And
nice
talk to
callback.
them.
Yeah. And when you're waiting in line at the store or something like that, because when you said I was talking to somebody and I made a joke, but especially in this day and age, especially in COVID times, like the reality is there's some people who are not talking with other people, or maybe they're only talking to the one or a couple people that happen to be living with them. So I encourage you, humans are social animals. Talk to somebody. It can be about whatever. It can be about something light and silly like poop jokes. It could be about something deep like death and religion and politics, or anywhere in between. But talk to somebody else. And to reference our episode from last Friday, I believe, we talked about elderly people. And if you're wondering, especially if you're in America, are there people who I could talk to who would love to talk with me and maybe have some interesting stories and things like that? That's a gold mine right there, right? And, this is a popular thing to do in America, especially as people are young or trying to get in volunteer hours or whatever, is go to a retirement home or go to a nursing home and engage with these people. Like, you go in or call and say, hey, I'd like to talk with someone. Guess what? They're going to find people for you to talk to.
Yeah, they will.
Yeah, so definitely go and do that. And of course, if you have old people in your own lives, maybe you give them a phone call today, So to recap, our challenge, one was to go talk to somebody, and the other one was something about highlighting our show.
I can't remember that. Yeah, highlight our show. Bookmark something in here that you find meaningful, and that will tell us what you find meaningful.
Yes, and share it with somebody share it on the internet, put it on social media, or just talk to someone and be like, hey, let's watch this and talk about that. That actually is one thing that I've really enjoyed now that I started reading more books, nonfiction books and things like that. I've started to recommend a couple to people and be like, hey, you read this and let's talk about it as you're going. And I've found that so great because I'm engaging with them again. And, I read it at X time and this is sometime later and they're telling me the things they brought out. So, book is a great way to do it too. So yeah, the challenge is to clip or highlight something or just share a show with somebody and talk about it, and then talk with somebody new. And if there was another challenge that we completely changed, go do that one too.
Yeah, I know. Put yourself to work.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, with that is the end of our show today. I'm Reed Garcia.
Ryder Richards.
And you guys have a great day.